Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I make this really cool mushroom pendant using a soldering iron. And soft soldered jewelry is just that. It's created with a soldering iron. We use no torch and no flame. So to get started, I'm going to go back to a previous project, and I had some scraps from when I made the copper butterflies. And if you haven't seen that video, I will link it above and below. So I'm going to use a circular object. For this project, I chose just a plastic lid from a bottle that measured about 1 inch, and I'm taking a marker and I'm tracing it onto my copper. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my metal shears, which are tin snips, and I'm going to carefully cut around the line that I drew, and I'm going to try to make it as circular as I can. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you have a metal punch to make discs, you can use that tool instead, but I'm simply just using scraps and cutting it out. It takes just about 20-30 seconds, and once I cut it out, if there's any really pointy ends, I'll go around with the tin snips and I'll snip those off. And I decided to do a second one, but I didn't use a template or anything to trace for this one. I just eyeballed it and created a bit of a smaller circle just by going in that circular motion. So I'm making 2 mushrooms in this project. One's going to be a little bit of a smaller pendant and the other one will be a little larger. Once I have them cut out, I'll again check them for any sharp corners, and then I'm going to move over to my doming and dapping block set. You're going to choose a circle on the block that is larger in size than your disc. And all you want to do is position it in there, and then you're going to need a hammer. So position the tool over the disc, and then you are going to tap it with a hammer. And you may want to tip the tool a little bit so that you get all the edges, and you just continue this process until you get most of the lines out of the metal. I will then move to a smaller sized circle and put my disc in there, and then continue to move down in tool size and continue to tap it. And I do not need to get all of the lines or the creases off of the metal where it's folding down, because we're creating a mushroom and that's a natural item. It's organic. We want to make sure that it doesn't look perfect, like machine made. We want it to look like a real mushroom. And that's another reason that I don't like to use a cutting tool to cut out the discs. When you cut them by hand, they have those just little differences that make them really look realistic. And once I finish the first disc, I'll move on to the second one. And I'm just going to continue to tap them and then check them until they are, nice and smooth and I'm pleased with the shapes. I'm going to check for any sharp edges, and I have 2 different files that I use. I have a regular metal file, that's the heavy duty one, and then I have an acrylic nail file. Inexpensive, works great. And once you use it for metal or for jewelry making, you don't want to use that for your nails again. You want to just keep that as a tool in your workshop. I have a heavy gauge copper wire, and I'm going to shine it up a little bit with some steel wool, and you can see the difference in the end that I polished and then the end that I haven't. So it really helps the solder stick when it's nice and clean. Moving over to my soldering station, I'm going to hold the wire underneath my mushroom cap, and I'm going to measure to see how long I want to make the stem. If it's a smaller cap, I'll make a shorter stem. If it's a larger cap, I'll make a bit of a longer stem. And I'm not measuring anything, with a ruler or anything. I'm just kind of eyeballing it and seeing what looks good. Going to choose a longer piece of wire. That's going to be the circle that I'm going to put my mushroom inside of. So I have a circular item that I'm going to wrap my wire around to create a circular shape. It doesn't have to be perfect. And as you can see, my ends didn't quite meet, so I'm just going to use a plier to, point them in a little bit, and then I'm going to take my hammer and I'm going to hammer that wire. It's going to flatten it out a little bit. It's going to give it some some nice texture, and it's going to give it a cool look. And you don't want to overhammer it because you do not want to make your metal brittle. Once I do one side, I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. And I will do this with 2 different loops, one for each of my mushrooms. And the way that I did that was I just kind of estimated the length I'll need. And once I hold my mushroom in there, I'll know whether I need to, make it a little bit smaller, cut a little bit of that metal off or not. Moving over to my soldering station, I have my soldering iron nice and hot, and I have liquid flux that I'm applying with a disposable brush. I'm going to pick up a small amount of solder with my soldering iron tip, and I'm going to apply that to the underside of my mushroom cap. I use a pair of old pliers to hold my project, and you always want to wear safety glasses. You want to work in a well-ventilated area and wear a mask when soldering. You also should work on a protected surface, such as a soldering mat or a ceramic block. Make sure that you cover all the copper areas on the inside of your mushroom cap, and then once you finish, you flip it over and do the other side. You may need to reapply flux because it will evaporate while you're working. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other side. I'm going to pick up a small amount of solder and I'm going to hold it against my project, which is now getting hot. And that solder should flow nice and smoothly over your metal. You want to double check it and make sure that you covered all areas of copper. And then I'm going to do my second one because I like to make 2 at a time. I like to work in batches. You don't have to. You can make 1 at a time. That's fine. And this was kind of an experiment with doing the larger and the smaller. I thought, why not do a variation? I love experimenting with those types of things. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to coat my wire with that lead-free solder. And again, we only ever use lead-free solder for jewelry making. And I'm going to use those old pliers to hold my metal. It cools off just in a second or 2, but it gets hot when your soldering iron is in contact with that metal, so you want to be careful. And I'm going to go over all the mushroom stems that I cut, and then I'm going to use flux again. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the other pieces with the 2 loops that I made. I'm going to apply the flux and I'm going to solder. I'm going to make sure I get every single edge. I want to get the inside, the outside, front and back. Next, I'm going to attach my stems to the underside of my mushroom caps. I'm going to hold the stem with my pliers, and I'm just going to take a small drop of solder and holding my stem in place, I'm going to allow that hot solder to flow down the stem and attach to the underside of the mushroom cap. You want to make sure you have enough solder on there. You don't need tons and tons, but don't just use a tiny little bit. Make sure you have a good connection. And once I do one mushroom, I'm going to check it out and make sure that, it looks pretty good. And then I'll move on to the next one. While I'm working on my project, I will sometimes come across little spots where I can see that I didn't coat the metal entirely with solder, so I just pick up a little bit and I go over it. Now, if I decide that I want to add a patina to this project in the end, I want to make sure that I have all of the metal coated with solder, because guess what? That patina isn't going to stick to that copper. It's only going to stick to the soldered areas. So it's really important that you cover and coat all the metal pieces with that shiny solder. Now comes the moment of truth when I see if my mushroom is going to fit into my loop. And I'm gonna look at it once more, and sometimes the stem's a little too long. It's better if you have a longer stem and you can cut it short than make it too short to begin with. So sometimes I'll cut a couple millimeters off of the bottom of the stem, and I'm gonna fit it in there and I'm gonna position it. I am using a piece of an old plate to help hold that for me, because it's going to be a 3D object inside of this loop, and I don't want the mushroom like all sticking out the front. I want it kind of centered. So I'm going to use that little piece of a broken plate to hold the loop for me so I can carefully position my mushroom where I want it. And holding it with pliers and using my dominant hand with my soldering iron, I'm going to just pick up a little bit of solder and I'm going to very carefully attach the stem where I want it. And if it doesn't go right the first time, I'll just melt it and do it over again. I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to make sure it's nice and secure on both sides. I'm going to use a pre-made jump ring to attach to the top of my loop as a bail for a chain or a cord. You can make your own loop by taking a piece of wire, wrapping it around a pencil or a dowel, snipping it off, and just soldering it. Or you can use pre-packaged ones. And I will put links to all of the items that I use down below in the description in case you are interested. So you want to very carefully position that bail and then just use a drop of solder to attach it. Once my bail is on there, I'm going to pick up a little bit of solder and add a couple decorative drops here and there, and that is just for decoration. Our project is put together, it is solid, and what we do next is we decorate. And that's an optional step, but I like to just give it a little bit more visual interest and a little bit more texture. So I'm going to put a few drops, toward the bottom and a few on the top. Sometimes I'll put a few also around the ring. It is completely up to you how you want to do it. Now that my first pendant is finished, I'm going to move on to my larger one, doing the same thing. I've attached the stem, and then I've attached the mushroom to the ring, and then I'm attaching a jump ring for a bail. I'm going to apply more flux, and then I'm going to do a little bit of decorating. And I also thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to give our mushroom cap a little bit of texture as well. So I'm going to add some dots on there, working around until I'm happy with my finished design. Once I'm finished with the mushroom cap, as I did with my last piece, I'm going to go around and just add a couple extra drops of solder for decoration until I'm pleased with my design. And once I'm all finished, I'm going to move to my sink, use a soft fingernail brush and some dish detergent and running water, and I'm going to clean up my project and then give it a polish with a soft cloth. And here is what I made. I hope you like it. I think they turned out awesome. You can put it on a chain or on a cord. And you know what? I'm not finished with this project, believe it or not. In my next video, we're going to continue and I'm going to show you what else you can do with these and how I can further decorate them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And click the little bell next to the subscribe button so you can get notified when I release a new video. Once again, check down below for all the tools and materials that I use, and I will see you next time. Bye guys!